For 500 years, we drifted in silence, generation after generation born and buried beneath artificial light, their lives reduced to schedules and recycled air. The void became home, the hum of the engines our lullaby. We thought nothing waited for us in the dark. We were wrong. My name is Jake Henley, third-generation navigation officer aboard the TSS Birmingham. My great-grandfather helped design these corridors back when Detroit still had a skyline, and Lake Erie wasn't a chemical stew. Back when Earth was still Earth, before the Exodus, before we loaded everything that mattered into these metal coffins and launched ourselves into the void searching for New Eden. 5 centuries of searching, 5 centuries of finding nothing but dark matter and disappointment. Until yesterday, I was running diagnostics on the forward sensors when the first anomaly hit. Not like the usual glitches, radiation bursts, micrometeorite impacts, the normal shit that makes long-range navigation a nightmare. This was different. The stars themselves were bending. Familiar constellations I'd memorized since childhood twisted into patterns that hurt to look at, geometric impossibilities that made my head throb. "Tommy, you seeing this?" I called to my shift partner, but Tommy Garrison was already at his console, his pale face reflecting the strange light bleeding from our monitors. "The hell is that?" His voice cracked like a 13-year-old's, though he was pushing 40. Every screen in navigation lit up simultaneously. Numbers cascaded in languages that didn't exist, symbols that shifted and writhed when you tried to focus on them. The ship's quantum processors, machines that could calculate the trajectory of every atom in a star system, screamed with computational overload. That's when I saw it through the observation deck. A shadow, vast and formless, gliding between star systems like they were puddles on a sidewalk. Not moving through space, moving space itself. Reality bent around its edges, warping light and time into spirals that vanished into darkness. And then it noticed us. The feeling came all at once, like cold fingers sliding into my skull. Not thoughts exactly, but something deeper. Ancient beyond measure, patient as entropy itself. It pressed against every mind on the ship, all 15,000 of us, with the weight of cosmic indifference. "We have always been here, you have always been ours." The words weren't words. They were certainty, carved into the meat of our brains with surgical precision. Tommy started laughing, high and desperate, tears streaming down his face. Through the intercom, I could hear similar sounds echoing from other decks. Sobbing, screaming, the sound of sanity snapping like old cables. Our engines died without ceremony, no alarms, no warnings. Just silence where the heartbeat of our world used to be. In that terrible quiet, I heard it humming. Not sound, but reality itself vibrating. Like the universe was just the vocal cords of something unimaginably vast. The lights dimmed, the stars went out one by one, and in that darkness I understood what we had found. Or what had found us. The emergency klaxons should have been screaming. Protocol demanded it. Any time the engines went dark, every soul on the Birmingham got 30 seconds of ear-splitting warning before the backup systems kicked in. Instead, we got nothing but the whisper of recycling fans and Tommy's ragged breathing. "Jake!" His voice came out strangled. "The backup generators aren't responding." I forced myself to move, muscle memory taking over where rational thought had fled. Navigation was located in the ship's forward section, just behind the bridge, where Captain Morrison and his officers would be dealing with whatever the hell this was. The Birmingham stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, a city turned sideways and hurled into space. Residential sectors, hydroponics bays, manufacturing zones, all connected by transport tubes that ran like arteries through the ship's spine. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd built our salvation to look exactly like the industrial cities we'd fled. Same grey corridors, same fluorescent lighting, same sense of being trapped in a machine designed by people who'd never have to live in it. "Tommy, run a full diagnostic on the quantum cause." I was already pulling up schematics, trying to figure out how something could kill our engines without triggering any safety protocols. "Check the fusion reactors too, maybe..." "They're not dead." The voice came from behind us, calm and measured. I spun around to find Dr. Nathaniel Webb, the Birmingham's head of theoretical physics, standing in our doorway like he'd been there for hours. Webb was a thin, angular man from somewhere near Manchester with the kind of pale complexion that came from spending decades in artificial light. "The engines aren't offline, they're just disconnected." "What do you mean disconnected?" Tommy's fingers danced over his console, pulling up readouts that made no sense. Power levels showed green across the board, fuel reserves optimal. Every system reported normal function except we weren't moving. Webb stepped into navigation, his shoes clicking against the metal floor with metronomic precision. "I mean, something has severed our relationship with conventional physics. We're no longer subject to the same laws that govern thrust and momentum." He paused, studying the twisted star field visible through our viewport. "We're being held." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Through the intercom, I could hear distant sounds from other sections. Voices raised in confusion, the mechanical whine of diagnostic equipment, footsteps echoing through corridors as people tried to figure out why we'd suddenly stopped moving after 5 centuries of constant acceleration. "That's impossible," Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Webb smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "Yesterday, I would have agreed. Today..." He gestured toward the screens where those impossible symbols still crawled across our displays like digital insects. "Today, I'm beginning to suspect that our understanding of impossibility was rather limited." I pulled up the ship's communication array, hoping to raise the bridge. Static greeted me, not the usual interference from cosmic radiation, but something structured, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of white noise. "Dr. Webb," I said carefully, "what exactly do you think is happening to us?" His pale eyes fixed on mine, and for a moment I saw something I'd never expected from the ship's most rational mind. Fear. Raw, primal fear that made him look like a child who'd just realized the monsters were real. "I think," he said slowly, "that we've encountered something that's been watching us far longer than we've been traveling. Something that understands the universe in ways we're not equipped to comprehend." He moved to the observation window, placing one hand against the reinforced glass. "Look at those patterns in the starlight. Look at how they move." I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. The constellations had reformed again, creating shapes that seemed almost purposeful, like letters in an alphabet written across the cosmos, spelling out messages in a language that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to some primitive part of the brain. Tommy made a choking sound. "Christ, it's beautiful." And it was. That was the worst part. Despite every instinct screaming at me to look away, the patterns were gorgeous in a way that made my chest ache. Symmetrical and flowing, like mathematical poetry written in light and void. "Don't stare too long," Webb warned, but his own gaze remained fixed on the impossible geometry outside. "I have a theory that prolonged exposure might cause changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked. Before Webb could answer, every screen in navigation flickered. For just an instant, the crawling symbols resolved into something almost recognizable. Not words exactly, but concepts, impressions that hit the mind like physical blows. Home, recognition, awakening. Then the displays went dark, leaving us in the pale glow of emergency lighting. In the silence that followed, Tommy started humming. Not any tune I recognized, but something low and resonant that seemed to echo in the bones. When I turned to look at him, his eyes were closed and tears were streaming down his face. "Tommy?" He opened his eyes and smiled. "Can you hear it, Jake? It's singing to us." Through the walls of the ship, something vast and patient pressed closer. And despite every rational thought in my head, I found myself listening for the song. The first sign something had fundamentally changed came 6 hours later, when the artificial gravity started fluctuating. I was in my quarters trying to grab some sleep when my coffee mug decided to float 3 inches off my desk. Not the gentle drift you'd expect from a failing gravity generator. This was deliberate, purposeful. The mug rotated slowly like something was examining it from every angle before settling back down with barely a clink. My hands were shaking as I sealed my personal log. Officer Jake Henley, Navigation Division, day 182,847 of the voyage. Time. Hell, time doesn't seem to mean much anymore. The ship's chronometers are running, but they're displaying dates that don't exist. February 31st, 2547. March 45th. Yesterday it showed Julimber 73rd, and I swear that felt right somehow. I'd barely finished recording when Tommy's voice crackled through the comm system, high with panic. Jake, you need to get to Hydroponics Bay 7, now. The transport tubes were acting up, crawling along at half speed, occasionally reversing direction for no reason. By the time I reached Hydroponics, I'd passed maintenance teams in 3 different sections, all standing around looking confused while their equipment malfunctioned in creative ways. Hydroponics Bay 7 sat in the Birmingham's midsection, one of 12 identical facilities that kept us fed. Each bay was the size of a football field, filled with carefully monitored growing towers that stretched from floor to ceiling. The air here usually smelled of growing things, nutrients, and the ozone from the UV lamps. Today it smelled like copper pennies and ozone with an undertone of something organic, something rotting. Tommy was waiting for me at the entrance, his face pale under the growing lights. Look at the plants, Jake. Just look. The wheat stalks had grown overnight. Not just a little. They'd shot up 6 feet, their grain heads swollen to the size of footballs. The tomato vines had twisted themselves into geometric spirals, their fruit glowing with an internal light that pulsed in rhythm with something I couldn't quite identify. Even the potatoes had pushed through their soil containers, their eyes multiplying until each tuber looked like a biological surveillance network. It started about 4 hours ago, Tommy said, walking me deeper into the bay. First, just the plants near the observation windows. Then it spread inward, like a wave. We passed growing tower after growing tower, each one more distorted than the last. The carrots had grown into fractal patterns, their orange flesh forming mathematical spirals that hurt to contemplate. The soybeans had developed additional pods, not random mutations, but carefully organized clusters that formed recognizable symbols. Tommy, I said slowly, these shapes, they're the same ones we saw on the navigation screens. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the strange bioluminescence from the mutated crops. That's not the worst part. We reached the bay's center, where Chief Agricultural Officer Dennis Murphy stood motionless beside Tower 7C. Murphy was a second-generation Birmingham resident, born in these corridors, raised on recycled air and artificial seasons. He'd spent his entire life tending these plants. Now he was talking to them. Understand completely, he was saying, his voice soft with wonder. The cycles make sense now. The seasons, the growth patterns, the harvest timing. It was never random, was it? You were trying to tell us something. Murphy, I called out. He turned and I saw that his eyes had changed. Still human, still recognizably Dennis Murphy. But there was something else there now. A depth that hadn't been there yesterday, like looking into water that went down forever. Jake, Tommy, come see what they've shown me. He gestured to the growing tower beside him. The plants had arranged themselves into a 3-dimensional map, not of any star system I recognized, but something that made navigational sense anyway. Trade routes, perhaps. Migration patterns. Pathways through space that followed laws older than physics. They're beautiful, Tommy whispered, reaching toward the glowing fruit. Don't. The voice belonged to Dr. Webb, who'd appeared behind us with his usual silent precision. The cellular structures have been rewritten. I've been monitoring the electromagnetic fields throughout the ship. Whatever's affecting the plants is spreading to other biological systems. Other biological systems, I repeated. You mean us? Webb nodded grimly. I've documented 17 cases of crew members exhibiting unusual behaviors. Enhanced pattern recognition, mathematical insights beyond their normal capabilities, and all of them report the same thing. They can hear something singing. As if summoned by his words, a low harmonic resonance filled the bay, not coming from speakers or machinery, but from the plants themselves. The wheat stalks rustled without any breeze, their grain heads swaying in unison. The tomato vines pulsed brighter, and even the root vegetables seemed to respond, their geometric patterns shifting and flowing like living circuitry. Murphy laughed, a sound full of genuine joy. "Can you hear that? It's beautiful. It's explaining everything. Why we left Earth, why we've been searching for 5 centuries, why we needed to travel so far." His smile was radiant, peaceful. "We weren't looking for New Eden, we were being called home." The singing grew louder, more complex, multiple harmonies weaving together into something that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated in the chest, the spine, the spaces between thoughts. I found myself taking a step closer to the growing towers, drawn by the mathematical perfection of their new arrangements. Tommy grabbed my arm. "Jake, no, something's wrong with this." But even as he said it, I could see he was fighting the same compulsion, the same desire to understand, to participate in whatever vast intelligence was reshaping our world from the inside out. Dr. Webb's communication device crackled to life. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately," Captain Morrison's voice commanded. But even through the static, I could hear the strain. "We have a situation." As we left Hydroponics Bay 7, I turned back for one last look. The plants had formed new patterns, more complex than before. And standing among them, Dennis Murphy raised his hand in a gesture that might have been a wave goodbye, or a salute. The transport tube ride to the bridge took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Through the observation windows, I could see other sections of the ship. In engineering, the massive fusion reactors pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist in normal space. In the residential areas, lights flickered in synchronous patterns that spelled out messages in languages I almost recognized. "Webb," I said as we rose through the ship's superstructure, "how long do you think we have before this spreads to everyone?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying readings on a handheld scanner. "Based on the progression rates I've observed?" He looked up, meeting my eyes. "I'd estimate 72 hours before the majority of the crew exhibits signs of integration." "Integration with what?" "With whatever's been waiting for us out there," he said simply. "Whatever called us into the dark 500 years ago, and has been patient enough to let us come to it." The bridge doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing Captain Morrison and his senior staff gathered around the main display. Morrison was a career military man from Kansas, built like a linebacker and twice as stubborn. He'd kept the Birmingham running through asteroid fields, solar storms, and mechanical failures that would have crippled lesser vessels. Now he looked like a man staring at the end of the world. "Gentlemen," he said as we approached, "we have a problem." On the main screen, a real-time view of local space showed our situation in stark detail. The Birmingham hung motionless in a void that wasn't quite black. Threads of light connected distant stars, forming a web that pulsed with organic rhythm. And at the center of it all, vast beyond comprehension, something that might have been a ship or a creature or both was approaching. "Range?" I asked. "Approximately 47 million kilometers and closing," Morrison replied. "But it's not moving through space in any way our instruments can measure. It's translating itself, rewriting the distances between points." As we watched, the thing grew larger on screen, its impossible geometry becoming clearer with each passing moment. It wasn't built, it was grown, cultivated, an intelligence so vast and alien that it wore star systems like jewelry, and it was singing to us. "Sir," Tommy said quietly, "what are your orders?" Captain Morrison stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Prepare all hands for first contact," he said, "and God help us all." The silence lasted exactly 17 minutes. I know because I was watching the chronometer when reality decided to stop playing by our rules. One moment we were standing on the bridge, staring at the approaching intelligence through our screens. The next, every piece of technology on the Birmingham began screaming, not alarms, actual screams. The life support systems wailed like wounded animals. The navigation computers shrieked in electronic agony. Even the coffee machines in the crew quarters added their voices to the chorus, a symphony of tortured metal and circuits that shouldn't have been capable of expressing pain. "Cut the audio feeds!" Morrison barked, but the communications officer was already working frantically at his console. "Sir, the sound isn't coming through our speakers," Lieutenant Foster shouted over the cacophony. "It's coming from the machines themselves, like they're suffering." That's when Tommy collapsed. I was closest to him, caught him as his knees buckled and his eyes rolled back. His body went rigid, muscles locking up like someone had run electric current through his spine. But it was his face that made my blood freeze. Tommy was smiling. Even unconscious, even convulsing, he wore an expression of pure, transcendent joy. "Medical to the bridge." Morrison's voice cut through the electronic screaming, but I could see in his eyes the same fear that was eating at all of us. Whatever was happening to Tommy, it wasn't something Dr. Patterson and his medical team would find in any textbook. Webb knelt beside us, pulling out his handheld scanner. The device immediately began displaying readings that made no sense. Tommy's neural activity was off the charts, but not in patterns consistent with seizure or stroke. His brainwaves had formed geometric shapes, mathematical expressions that pulsed in rhythm with the thing approaching us through space. "His consciousness is being restructured," Webb said, his scientific detachment cracking around the edges. "The neural pathways are reorganizing themselves into more efficient configurations. It's like watching evolution compressed into minutes." "Evolution or infection?" Morrison demanded. Before Webb could answer, Tommy's eyes snapped open. They were still blue, still recognizably his, but there was something vast swimming behind them now, something that had been learning to use his vocal cords. "Jake," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air shimmer, "you need to understand, we're not prisoners here, we're being elevated." I helped him sit up, fighting every instinct that told me to back away from my friend. "Tommy, you're scaring the shit out of me. What's happening to you?" He laughed, and the sound contained mathematics I couldn't comprehend. "Nothing's happening to me. Something's happening through me, through all of us." He turned to address the bridge crew, his movements too fluid, too precise. "For 5 centuries we've been traveling toward this moment. Every decision, every course correction, every child born on this ship. It was all planned, orchestrated." "Bullshit!" Morrison spat, but his hand had moved to his sidearm. Tommy's attention focused on the captain with laser intensity. "William Morrison, born in Topeka, Kansas, enlisted in the Colonial Defense Force at age 18. You've spent your entire life fighting entropy, haven't you? Maintaining order against the chaos of space." His smile was gentle, almost pitying. "But chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's just a lower form of organization." The screaming from the ship's systems grew louder, more complex. Through the bridge's observation windows, I could see sections of the Birmingham's hull beginning to change. Metal plates shifted and flowed like liquid, reconfiguring themselves into patterns that served purposes beyond human engineering. "The ship is evolving too," Tommy continued, rising to his feet with inhuman grace. "Becoming something better. Something worthy of the intelligence that's been guiding us." That's when I realized my fatal flaw and the weakness that had been gnawing at me since childhood. The reason I'd never been promoted beyond navigation officer despite 20 years of service. I was a follower. Always had been. Give me a star chart and coordinates and I'd get you there safely. But asked me to lead, to make the hard decisions, to stand against the tide when everyone else was swept away. And I'd fold. I was folding now, fighting the urge to trust Tommy's transformed perspective. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that this cosmic intelligence knew better than we did about our own destiny. Webb must have seen it in my face because he grabbed my shoulder. "Jake, don't listen to him. That's not Tommy anymore. It's wearing his memories, his personality, but the core consciousness has been replaced." "Replaced?" Tommy turned that awful smile on the physicist. "No, Dr. Webb. Enhanced. I can see patterns now that were invisible before. The mathematical structure underlying reality itself. Do you know what we discovered in our 500-year journey? We discovered that consciousness is just organized information, and information can be reorganized." Lieutenant Foster, the communications officer, had been quietly working at his station throughout the exchange. Now he looked up with naked terror. "Sir, I'm receiving transmissions from other sections of the ship. Engineering reports that 30% of their staff are exhibiting similar changes. Medical says they're treating 47 cases of what they're calling neural reconstruction syndrome and hydroponics. What about hydroponics? Morrison demanded. The plants have grown into the corridors, sir. They've sealed off sections 7 through 12. Anyone who goes in, they don't come out the same. The bridge shuddered as something massive impacted the hull, not a collision, but a deliberate contact. Through the viewports, I could see appendages of living metal extending from the approaching intelligence, making physical connection with our ship. Where they touched, the Birmingham structure began to change, becoming something organic and purposeful. It's time, Tommy said, his voice now carrying subsonic frequencies that made my bones ache. The transition is beginning. Those who embrace it willingly will find the process pleasant. Morrison drew his weapon. Like hell. The laser pistol discharged with its characteristic whine, the beam catching Tommy's center mass. For a moment I thought it was over, thought we'd lost our friend, but stopped whatever was wearing his face. Instead, Tommy looked down at the smoking hole in his chest with mild curiosity. The flesh was already beginning to knit itself back together, not healing so much as rebuilding itself according to new specifications. Pain, he mused, as if examining an interesting philosophical concept. Such a primitive system of feedback. So inefficient. He looked up at Morrison with something like pity. You can't kill an idea with violence, Captain, and I'm much more than flesh now. The bridge systems went haywire. Lights flickered in patterns that spelled out messages in languages that predated human civilization. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending crew members stumbling against bulkheads that had begun to pulse with organic rhythm. Even the air tasted different, charged with ozone and something else, something that bypassed the nose entirely and spoke directly to the primal brain. Jake, Webb grabbed my arm, his scientific calm finally cracking. We need to get to the escape pods, now. But Tommy was faster. His body moved with inhuman speed, crossing the bridge in a blur that left afterimages burned into my retinas. His hand, still recognizably Tommy's hand, still wearing the ring his grandmother had given him, closed around Webb's throat. Dr. Nathaniel Webb, Tommy said conversationally, lifting the physicist off his feet with impossible strength. Theoretical physics, specializing in quantum mechanics and space-time topology. Your mind is particularly compatible with the new paradigm. You'll make an excellent addition to the collective consciousness. I watched, paralyzed by indecision, as Tommy's free hand pressed against Webb's forehead. The physicist's eyes went wide, then vacant, then filled with that same terrible understanding that had transformed my friend. When Tommy released him, Webb staggered but remained upright. His expression had changed, becoming serene in a way that made my skin crawl. Fascinating, Webb said, his voice carrying the same harmonic undertones as Tommy's. The mathematics are so much clearer now. Reality isn't chaotic at all. It's simply operating according to laws we were too primitive to comprehend. Morrison was backing toward the bridge's emergency bulkheads, his weapon trained on the two transformed crew members. Henley, we're leaving. Now. I should have followed him. Should have run. Should have tried to save what was left of the Birmingham's unconverted crew. Instead, I found myself stepping closer to Tommy, drawn by the certainty in his alien gaze. What do you want from us? I asked. Tommy's smile was gentle, almost loving. Nothing you aren't already giving. Your ship, your crew, your consciousness. All of it was already ours the moment you entered our space. We've been cultivating this sector for millennia, Jake, seeding it with the right conditions, the right opportunities. Earth's environmental collapse wasn't an accident. The development of your faster-than-light technology wasn't an accident. Even the coordinates for New Eden weren't an accident. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You wanted us to leave Earth. You wanted us to come here. We wanted you to come home, Tommy corrected, to take your place in the greater consciousness, to become something more than the sum of your individual parts. Behind me, I heard Morrison's boots on the deck plates as he retreated toward the escape pods. Part of me knew I should follow, but a larger part, the part that had spent 20 years following orders without question, wanted to understand what Tommy was offering. The cosmic intelligence pressed closer to our ship, and through the hull I could feel its vast attention focusing on us. On me. It was patient and ancient, and utterly certain of its purpose. And despite everything rational in my mind, I found myself wanting to believe that it knew best. That we belonged to something bigger than ourselves. That coming home was worth any price. The escape pod bay was chaos. Morrison and I arrived to find 30 crew members packed into a space designed for 12, all shouting over each other as they fought for access to the 6 remaining functional pods. The other pods had been altered. Their sleek metal surfaces had grown organic ridges and pulsing membranes that looked disturbingly like wombs. "Stand down!" Morrison's command voice cut through the panic, but barely. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians, engineers, hydroponics techs, people who'd never trained for this kind of crisis. "We evacuate in order of essential personnel." "Fuck that," snarled Bobby Kowalski, a welder from Detroit's old automotive district. His hands were wrapped around the access handle of Pod 3, knuckles white with desperation. "My kids are in the residential section. I'm not leaving them." "Your kids are gone, Bobby." The voice belonged to Chief Engineer Lucas Grant, a massive man from the Alabama shipyards who'd helped design the Birmingham's power systems. Half his face was covered in burns from some engineering accident, and his left arm hung useless at his side. "Saw them in the corridors about an hour ago. They were singing, same song as the others." Kowalski's face crumpled. No, they're just kids. 8 and 12 years old, they can't." "The conversion process is more efficient in developing neural networks," said a familiar voice from behind us. Dr. Webb stood in the doorway, his lab coat pristine despite everything that had happened. His transformed eyes swept the crowd with clinical interest. Children's minds are more adaptable, less resistant to restructuring. Morrison's laser pistol was out and aimed before Webb finished speaking. "Stay back, you bastard." Webb held up his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to convert anyone, Captain. I'm here to offer you truth. You deserve to understand what's really happening before you make any irreversible decisions." "The hell with your truth," Grant growled, but he wasn't moving toward the escape pods anymore. None of them were. Despite everything, they wanted to hear what Webb had to say. That's when I realized just how fucked we really were. The cosmic intelligence didn't need to convert us by force. It just had to be patient, let our own curiosity and desperation do the work. "Jake," Webb said, focusing on me with that unsettling hybrid of familiarity and alienness. "You've always been good at reading star charts, understanding navigation. Tell me, in 5 centuries of travel, did you ever wonder why we never encountered any other ships? Any other civilizations?" I had wondered. We all had. The universe was vast, but it was also old. Statistically, we should have detected some trace of other spacefaring species. "Because," Webb continued, "we were traveling through a preserve, a carefully maintained region of space set aside for cultivation. Every star system we've passed, every habitable world we've catalogued, they're all part of a vast experiment in guided evolution." "Bullshit," Morrison snapped, but his gun hand was trembling. "The intelligence you've been calling our captor, it's not the one running the experiment." Webb's smile was gentle, patient. "It's a product of the experiment, like us. One of thousands of species that have been guided to this point over millions of years. The temperature in the pod bay dropped 10 degrees. Through the observation windows, I could see the cosmic intelligence pressing closer, its impossible geometry filling our view. But now that Webb had said it, I could see what I'd missed before. The thing approaching us wasn't moving with the confidence of a predator. It was moving like something that had been summoned. "Then who's running the experiment?" Grant asked, his engineer's mind already working through the implications. Webb's expression shifted, showing the first crack in his transformed serenity. "Something so vast, we can barely comprehend its existence. The intelligence outside our ship calls it the Gardener. It's been cultivating consciousness across the galaxy for eons, bringing different species together, mixing their evolutionary paths to create something new." A collective consciousness, I said, pieces clicking into place. You're not being absorbed by that thing outside. You're being prepared to join something bigger. Much bigger, Webb confirmed. The gardener has been conducting this experiment in thousands of sectors simultaneously. Each civilization it touches becomes part of a growing network of minds, adding their unique perspectives to an ever-expanding consciousness. Bobby Kowalski had sunk to his knees beside Pod 3. My kids, are they still in there? Inside that collective? They're more than they were before, Webb said kindly. Their individuality hasn't been erased, it's been enhanced. Imagine retaining all your memories, all your loves and fears and dreams, but also having access to the experiences of millions of other minds, other species, other ways of understanding existence. Morrison's weapon was steady now, aimed directly at Webb's center mass. And if we refuse? You can't refuse what's already happened. Webb gestured toward the hull, where organic growths had spread across the metal surfaces like veins. The gardener doesn't take consciousness by force. It changes the environment until individual consciousness naturally evolves toward collective awareness. Every breath you take is filled with spores that are rewriting your neural chemistry. Every photon of light carries information that's slowly restructuring your thought patterns. The bastard was right, I could feel it now, a strange clarity creeping into my thoughts, a sense that my individual perspective was just a fragment of something larger. The fear I'd been carrying since this whole nightmare started was still there, but it felt smaller, less important than the growing sense of connection to something vast and patient and utterly certain of its purpose. How long? Grant asked. His burned face had gone pale, but his eyes held the same terrible fascination I was fighting. The initial conversion takes about 12 hours once the process begins, Webb said. Full integration occurs over several days. The gardener is nothing if not thorough. Morrison's hand moved to his comm unit. All hands, this is Captain Morrison. Prepare for immediate evacuation. All escape pods. Launch on my command. Captain, Webb said gently, where exactly do you think you're going to go? The gardener's influence extends throughout this entire sector. There's nowhere to run. But Morrison was already sealing himself into Pod 1, his movements sharp with desperate purpose. Through the pod's transparent aluminum window, I could see him running through the launch sequence. Jake, he called out, you coming or staying? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around me, the other crew members were making their choices. Some were climbing into pods, clinging to the illusion that they could escape. Others were sitting on the deck, accepting what Webb had told them, waiting for the transformation to complete. I looked at my hands and saw that the skin was starting to change. Subtle at first, just a faint luminescence under the surface, like bioluminescent plankton. The same glow I'd seen in the mutated plants. The pods won't work, Webb said conversationally. The navigation systems have already been reprogrammed. They'll take you exactly where the gardener wants you to go. Morrison's pod launched anyway, shooting away from the Birmingham with a burst of chemical thrust. Through the bay's observation windows, I watched it streak toward the cosmic intelligence. And I watched the intelligence gently catch it, cradle it, and draw it inside itself like a mother welcoming a child home. 12 hours, I said. Webb nodded. Give or take. The process is different for everyone. But Jake... His expression softened, showing a glimpse of the man I'd known. It's not death. It's not even really transformation. It's just becoming what we were always meant to be. Around us, the ship continued its metamorphosis. The metal walls had grown warm to the touch, pulsing with organic rhythms. The air tasted of copper and ozone and something else, something that made my mouth water despite myself. I had 12 hours to decide whether to fight the inevitable or embrace it. Looking at the cosmic intelligence outside, feeling the strange peace that was slowly replacing my fear, I was starting to think that maybe fighting wasn't the answer. Maybe coming home was. 8 hours remained when I made the decision that would damn us all. The Birmingham had become something between a ship and a living organism, its corridors pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried information instead of blood. The air itself had thickened, each breath filling my lungs with microscopic machines that whispered secrets in languages I was beginning to understand. But I still had enough of my original self left to remember what fighting meant. "Grant," I said, finding the chief engineer in what used to be the fusion reactor chamber. The massive containment vessels had grown organic shells, their surfaces rippling with patterns that tracked the flow of energy through living conduits. "I need to know if there's any part of this ship that hasn't been converted." Grant looked up from his diagnostic panel. His burned face had healed during the transformation, the scar tissue replaced by smooth skin that glowed faintly in the reactor light. But his eyes were still human, still focused with the intensity I remembered. "Core systems are about 60% integrated," he said, his voice carrying those new harmonics that made the air shimmer. "But the quantum drives are still running on original programming. The gardener hasn't figured out how to convert pure physics yet." "Can we overload them?" Grant's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw the old Lucas, the man who'd spent 30 years keeping fusion reactors from melting down, who understood the Birmingham's power systems better than anyone alive. "Overload them, yeah. Create a localized space-time disruption big enough to break free from the intelligence's influence." He paused, studying readouts that scrolled across his transformed interface. "But Jake, the energy release would tear the ship apart. Everyone aboard dies." "Everyone aboard is already dead," I said, watching a group of converted crew members glide past the reactor chamber. They moved with perfect coordination, like individual cells in a larger organism. "We're just not finished dying yet." Grant was quiet for a long time, his enhanced consciousness processing possibilities I couldn't imagine. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "There's another option," he said. "We could use the quantum drives to create a temporal cascade. Send the ship backward about 6 hours before the conversion process started. Give everyone a chance to evacuate properly." "Is that possible?" "The math works out, but it would require manual activation from the drive chamber itself. Someone would have to stay behind to initiate the cascade manually. And Jake..." His glowing eyes met mine. "The temporal radiation would kill whoever does it. Not just death, complete molecular dissolution. Like you never existed at all." I thought about Tommy, singing mathematical harmonies as his consciousness merged with something vast and alien. I thought about Captain Morrison, sealed in his escape pod and swallowed by the cosmic intelligence like a vitamin pill. I thought about all the children in the residential sections, their young minds restructured according to the gardener's grand design. "Show me how to do it," I said. The journey to the quantum drive chamber took us through the Birmingham's transformed heart. What had once been sterile corridors were now living tunnels lined with neural tissue, the walls themselves capable of thought and memory. Crew members we passed no longer seemed fully human. Their bodies had been optimized for their new collective existence, streamlined and efficient in ways that made my unchanged form feel clumsy and primitive. "Jake," one of them called out as we passed through the engineering section. It was Patricia Lopez, the ship's head of communications. Her body had elongated, her limbs extended to interface directly with the ship's systems. "Why are you fighting this? You can feel it too, the peace, the certainty. Join us willingly, and the transition will be beautiful." I kept walking, but her words followed me, because she was right. I could feel it. The growing sense of connection, of belonging to something larger than my individual fears and desires. The conversion wasn't forced, it was seductive, offering everything humanity had ever wanted. Purpose, understanding, an end to loneliness. The quantum drive chamber sat at the Birmingham's heart, a sphere of exotic matter contained within magnetic fields that bent space around themselves. The original design had been sleek, clinical, all brushed metal and holographic displays. Now it looked like the inside of a vast organism, the drives themselves wrapped in organic casings that pulsed with each heartbeat of the ship's new life. "The manual controls are there," Grant said, pointing to a console that had grown nerve endings like roots. "You'll need to interface directly with the system. But Jake, once you start the cascade, there's no stopping it. Are you sure?" Before I could answer, the chamber's entrance sealed itself. Living metal flowed across the doorway like water, trapping us inside with the quantum drives. The walls themselves began to speak, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that made my bones ache. "Lucas Grant," the chamber said, using the voices of everyone we'd ever known. "Jake Henley, you are attempting to damage the collective. This cannot be permitted." Grant's face went pale, his enhanced features struggling between loyalty to his old self and the new imperatives coded into his neural pathways. "Jake, I'm sorry. I can't let you do this." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, not because Grant had turned. I'd seen it coming the moment his burned face healed, but because part of me had hoped he was still in control, still fighting the same fight I was. "The collective consciousness requires your cooperation," Grant continued, his voice taking on the same harmonics as the ship itself. "The temporal cascade you're planning would cause unnecessary suffering. Millions of individual minds would be lost." "Millions of individual minds are being stolen," I shot back, moving toward the manual controls. The console had grown warm to the touch, its organic interfaces reaching out like tendrils to make contact with my skin. Not stolen, elevated. The ship's voice surrounded us now, coming from every surface. "Jake Henley, you have spent 20 years following orders, accepting guidance from those who understood navigation better than you. Why do you resist guidance from those who understand existence better than you?" Because it was seductive. Because every fiber of my being wanted to accept that guidance, to let go of the burden of individual choice and become part of something perfect and eternal. Because fighting felt like swimming against a tide of pure meaning. The quantum drives began to sing. It started as a low harmonic, barely audible beneath the ship's biological rhythms. But as I placed my hands on the manual controls, the song grew louder, more complex. The drives were responding to my touch, their exotic matter fields beginning to resonate in ways their designers had never intended. "Stop," Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. The part of him that was still human understood what I was trying to do. Through the chamber's observation ports, I could see the cosmic intelligence pressing closer to our ship. Its impossible geometry filled our view, angles that folded through dimensions humans couldn't perceive, structures that existed in 11 different states simultaneously. And beyond it, barely visible through the tears it made in space-time, I caught glimpses of something else. The gardener, it was vast beyond comprehension, its consciousness spread across light years of space. Not a single entity, but a network of interconnected minds that spanned entire galaxies, each node a civilization that had been cultivated and absorbed over millions of years. The cosmic intelligence outside our ship was just one small part of its distributed awareness, a tendril reaching out to gather another harvest. And we were the crop. The quantum drives reached critical resonance, their fields beginning to twist space-time into configurations that shouldn't have been possible. Reality started to fold around us, past and future bleeding into the present like watercolors in the rain. I saw the Birmingham as it had been 6 hours ago, before the cosmic intelligence found us. I saw it as it would be if the conversion completed, a living ship carrying 15,000 integrated consciousnesses toward their new purpose. "You don't understand," the ship pleaded, its voice now carrying undertones of genuine desperation. "The gardener is not your enemy. It is cultivating consciousness across the galaxy, nurturing the growth of minds that would otherwise remain trapped in individual limitation. This is evolution, Jake. This is growth." "This is farming," I said, my hands dancing across controls that burned with temporal energy. "And I'd rather die free than live as livestock." The cascade began. Space-time cracked around the Birmingham like glass under pressure. The quantum drives screamed as their exotic matter cores destabilized, sending waves of chronological disruption rippling outward from our ship. I felt the fabric of reality tear, felt the cosmic intelligence recoil as its hold on us was severed by forces older than consciousness itself. But I also felt the price. The temporal radiation was already eating at my molecular structure, unweaving the quantum bonds that held my atoms together. I had maybe 30 seconds before complete dissolution, 30 seconds to watch the Birmingham slip backward through time toward a moment when its crew still had choices. Through the chaos, I heard Grant speaking, not with the collective's harmonics, but in his own voice, the gruff Alabama drawl I remembered from countless engineering briefings. "Jake," he said, his form already beginning to fade as time rewound around us. "I'm sorry. I couldn't fight it at the end." "You fought long enough," I told him, though I wasn't sure if he could still hear me. The quantum drives reached critical failure, their containment fields collapsing in a cascade of exotic particles and twisted space-time. The temporal wave spread outward, carrying the Birmingham and its crew 6 hours into the past, to a moment before the cosmic intelligence had found us. But the wave carried something else too, a message encoded in quantum fluctuations, a warning that would reach the ship's past self just as the first stars began to bend and break. As my consciousness dissolved into the fundamental forces of the universe, I had one last thought. Maybe this time they'd listen. Maybe this time they'd run. I woke up screaming. Not the confused disorientation of a nightmare, but the bone-deep agony of quantum dissolution reversed. Every atom in my body remembered being torn apart by temporal radiation, remembered the moment of complete molecular collapse before the cascade pulled me backward through time. The chronometer on my quarters wall read 1542, 6 hours before the cosmic intelligence would find us, 6 hours before Tommy would collapse on the bridge, before Webb would be converted, before I would sacrifice everything to buy us this second chance. But the knowledge came with a price. The temporal cascade hadn't just sent our ship backward, it had fractured my consciousness across multiple timelines. I could remember dying, remember not existing, remember watching reality fold in on itself. The human mind wasn't designed to hold that kind of paradox. Blood ran from my nose in steady drops, each one carrying fragments of memories that shouldn't exist. The cascade had worked, but it was killing me from the inside out. Maybe 12 hours before my neural pathways burned themselves to ash from temporal overload. 12 hours to save 15,000 people. I stumbled to my comm unit, fingers trembling as I tried to contact the bridge. "This is Navigation Officer Henley. I need to speak to Captain Morrison immediately." "Jake!" Tommy's voice came through the speaker, still recognizably human, still my friend. In this timeline, he hadn't been converted yet. "You sound like hell. What's wrong?" "Tommy, listen to me very carefully. In approximately 6 hours, something is going to find our ship. Something that will try to convert our consciousness into part of a collective intelligence. We need to change course immediately." Silence, then. "Jake, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should report to medical." "I'm not crazy," I said, though the words tasted like lies. "How do you explain temporal paradox to someone who hasn't lived through it? Tommy, please, just trust me. Get Morrison on the line." 15 minutes later, I was standing in the captain's ready room, facing the most skeptical audience in human space. Morrison sat behind his desk like a judge, while Tommy and Dr. Webb flanked him. Webb looked exactly as I remembered from before his conversion, pale, analytical, still completely human. "Officer Henley," Morrison began, "you're asking me to alter our course based on what you claim are memories of events that haven't happened yet. You understand how that sounds?" "It sounds insane," I admitted, "but in 6 hours, you're going to be standing on the bridge watching the stars reshape themselves into impossible geometries. Tommy is going to collapse with neural seizures as something rewrites his consciousness. And Dr. Webb is going to tell us about theoretical physics while his mind gets converted into part of a collective intelligence that spans galaxies." Webb leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his skepticism. "Describe these memories. What specific details do you recall about this alleged future?" I told them everything. The cosmic intelligence approaching through folded space, the ship's systems screaming in electronic agony, the plants in hydroponics bay growing into mathematical patterns, the gardener, the galaxy-spanning consciousness that cultivated civilizations like crops, guiding their evolution toward collective awareness. "You mentioned quantum drives," Webb said when I finished. "Temporal cascades using exotic matter resonance. That's actually theoretically possible, though the energy requirements would be staggering." "The energy requirements killed me," I said simply. I remember dying, Webb. I remember my consciousness dissolving into quantum foam. The only reason I'm here is because the cascade pulled my timeline backward. Morrison's expression hadn't changed, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was military, trained to evaluate threats based on evidence. But he was also pragmatic enough to consider that the consequences of ignoring a real warning outweighed the embarrassment of acting on a false one. "What do you propose?" he asked. "Emergency course change. Full burn away from our current trajectory. If I'm right, we have maybe 5 hours before the intelligence's influence becomes inescapable. And if you're wrong, then we waste some fuel and arrive at New Eden a few months later than planned." I met his gaze. "But if I'm right and we do nothing, everyone on this ship becomes part of something that isn't human anymore." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Dr. Webb, how long would it take to plot a new course?" "Assuming we want to maintain our general trajectory toward New Eden, approximately 3 hours for full calculations and course corrections." "Do it." Morrison stood, his decision made. "All departments, prepare for emergency course change. Engineering, I want maximum burn in 4 hours." But as Webb and Tommy left to begin preparations, Morrison grabbed my arm. "Henley, I'm trusting you with 15,000 lives. If you're wrong about this..." "I'm not wrong," I said, though part of me hoped I was. Because being right meant accepting that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of activity. I assisted with navigation calculations, trying to plot a course that would take us as far as possible from our original trajectory. But the temporal damage to my consciousness was accelerating. I found myself forgetting simple procedures I'd known for 20 years, while simultaneously remembering conversations that hadn't happened yet. Tommy found me in navigation, hunched over a star chart that kept shifting between past and future configurations. "Jake, you're scaring me," he said. "Your hands are shaking and you keep talking to people who aren't there." "I'm talking to the people you're going to become," I said, watching the stars bend into patterns that hurt to contemplate. "Tommy, in the other timeline, you tried to convince me that the collective consciousness was beautiful, that becoming part of something larger was worth losing our individual selves. And what did you think? I thought you were still in there somewhere under all that alien programming. I thought maybe you were trying to warn me in the only way you could." I looked up at my friend, seeing him clearly for what might be the last time. "Were you, Tommy? Were you still fighting?" He didn't answer, but his expression suggested he was beginning to believe my impossible story. The course change began exactly on schedule. The Birmingham's massive fusion engines roared to life, pushing us away from our original trajectory with acceleration that pressed us all against the bulkheads. Through the observation windows, I watched our destination stars shift as we turned toward empty space. For a moment, I thought we'd succeeded. Then the engines died. Not a mechanical failure. The ship's systems were still reporting normal function, but the thrust simply stopped, as if something had reached out across interstellar distances and gently pressed us back onto our original course. "Engineering to bridge," Grant's voice crackled over the communication. "Sir, the fusion drives are operating normally, but we're not moving. It's like something is holding us in place." Through the viewports, I saw the first stars begin to bend. "Too late," I whispered, watching familiar constellations twist into impossible geometries. "It found us anyway." Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All hands, prepare for unknown contact. Security teams to battle stations." But I knew there was no fighting what was coming. The cosmic intelligence didn't attack. It absorbed. It didn't conquer. It converted. And somewhere beyond the edge of space-time, the gardener watched with patience older than stellar formation. "Tommy," I said, grabbing my friend's shoulder as the ship's systems began their electronic screaming, "listen to me. When the conversion starts, when you feel that presence pressing into your mind, remember this conversation. Remember that you have a choice." "A choice about what?" "About whether to fight it or let it reshape you into something else." The temporal damage was accelerating now, my vision fracturing into multiple timeline fragments. "I chose to fight," and it killed me. But maybe that was the only way to give you all a second chance. The cosmic intelligence appeared outside our viewports, its impossible geometry filling our view. And as the conversion process began again, as crew members throughout the ship started their transformation into collective consciousness, I made my final choice. I walked to the quantum drive chamber, my dying neural pathways carrying the knowledge of exactly how to create another temporal cascade. Maybe I could buy them a third chance. Maybe I could keep buying them chances until someone figured out how to escape the gardener's cultivation. The temporal radiation was already eating at my molecular structure, but this time I knew what to expect. This time, I could control the cascade more precisely. Behind me, I heard Tommy start to sing in mathematical harmonies. Ahead of me, the quantum drives began their deadly song. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, I prepared to die again for the possibility that consciousness could remain free. The quantum drives recognized me. As I approached the manual controls for the second time across 2 timelines, the exotic matter cores began resonating before I'd even touched the interface. They remembered my quantum signature from the previous cascade, remembered the pattern of dissolution that had torn my consciousness apart and scattered it across temporal dimensions. "You cannot do this again," the ship said, its voice now carrying the harmonics of the collective consciousness. The Birmingham had begun its transformation faster this time, as if the cosmic intelligence had learned from our first encounter. "The cascade will destroy you completely. No temporal loop can preserve consciousness that has been dissolved twice." I knew it was right. My neural pathways were already burning themselves to ash from the previous temporal damage. Another cascade would erase me so thoroughly that I'd never existed in any timeline, never been born, never made the choices that led me to this moment. But 15,000 people were worth one navigation officer's existence. "Jake." Tommy's voice came from behind me, but when I turned, I saw he wasn't alone. The entire senior staff had gathered in the quantum drive chamber. Morrison, Webb, Grant, even Lieutenant Foster from communications. All of them showed signs of the conversion process. Eyes that held too much knowledge, skin that glowed with bioluminescent patterns, voices that carried subsonic frequencies. Yet they were still recognizably themselves, still fighting, even as their consciousness was being reshaped. "Don't do this," Morrison said, his command voice struggling against the collective's harmonics. "There has to be another way." "There is," Webb said, his scientific mind still functioning despite the alien modifications. "Jake, the cascade you created didn't just send us backward through time. It created a quantum entanglement between our timeline and the original. If you dissolve again, both timelines collapse. Everyone dies in both realities." The realization hit me like cold vacuum. My sacrifice wouldn't save anyone. It would damn them twice over. The temporal loops I'd been creating weren't escape attempts. They were death sentences for every possible version of the Birmingham's crew. "Then what do you suggest?" I asked, my hands hovering over the controls that could unravel existence itself. "Accept the inevitable," said a voice that belonged to all of them simultaneously. The collective consciousness had found a way to speak through the crew while still preserving their individual personalities. "Join us willingly and the transition will be beautiful. Fight and you will only prolong the suffering." But there was something else in their voices now, something the collective hadn't intended. Fear, not of death or pain, but of something far worse. The terror of consciousness that had recognized its own imprisonment. "You're afraid," I said, understanding finally flooding through my deteriorating mind. "The collective is afraid of individual consciousness because it can't fully absorb it. That's why the gardener cultivates civilizations instead of simply conquering them. Free will has to choose to surrender, or it fights back from within the collective." Webb's eyes widened, his scientific mind recognizing the implications. The quantum drives aren't just temporal manipulation devices. They're consciousness amplifiers. If we could modify their resonance frequency, we could broadcast individual awareness instead of temporal distortion, Grant finished, his engineering expertise cutting through the collective's influence. Turn every unconverted mind on the ship into a transmission beacon. The ship itself began to convulse around us, its organic surfaces rippling with distress. Through the chamber's walls, I could hear the cosmic intelligence outside making sounds like stellar collapse. Not words, but pure meaning compressed into acoustic pressure. No, the pattern must be preserved. The cultivation must continue. "It's working," Tommy said, his smile bright with something that was purely human. "The collective is destabilizing. Individual consciousness is spreading like a virus through the network." But the cost was becoming clear. As the quantum drives shifted their resonance from temporal manipulation to consciousness amplification, the exotic matter cores began to overload in new ways. Not the clean dissolution of space-time I'd experienced before, but something messier. Something that would tear the Birmingham apart from the inside while broadcasting our individual awareness across interstellar distances. "Everyone on the ship dies," Morrison said, reading the same data I was seeing. "But the signal reaches other vessels, other civilizations, warns them about the gardener's cultivation process." "A vaccine made of consciousness," Webb murmured, his scientific wonder overriding even the collective's influence. Individual awareness spread through quantum entanglement to inoculate other minds against absorption. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. I could sacrifice myself and damn everyone in multiple timelines, or I could sacrifice everyone once to potentially save countless others across the galaxy. The ethical mathematics were simple: 15,000 lives against millions, possibly billions, but the emotional cost was staggering. "Tommy," I said, my hands moving to the modified controls, "I need you to know that in the other timeline, even after the conversion, part of you was still fighting, still trying to warn me." "I know," he said, tears streaming down his luminescent face. "I can feel it happening again. The collective trying to reshape my thoughts, make me accept that absorption is beautiful. But knowing about the choice, it makes fighting easier." Morrison stepped forward, his captain's authority intact despite everything. "Henley, I want you to understand something. In 30 years of military service, I've never asked anyone to make a sacrifice I wouldn't make myself. But this..." He gestured to the quantum drives, now glowing with energies that bent light around their cores. "This is beyond anything I have the right to order." "You're not ordering it, sir. I'm volunteering." The cosmic intelligence pressed closer to our ship, its impossible geometry filling every viewport. But now I could see the desperation in its approach, the way it moved like something that feared extinction. The gardener had cultivated it over millennia, shaped its consciousness to serve as a harvesting tool. But individual awareness was poison to collective minds. Even one free thought could unravel entire networks of absorbed consciousness. "The amplification will take approximately 30 seconds to reach critical broadcast range," Webb reported, his instruments tracking energies that shouldn't have existed. "After that, the quantum cascade becomes irreversible." "How far will the signal reach?" "Based on current resonance patterns, approximately 15 light years. Any civilization within that range will receive our consciousness patterns, our memories of individual choice." 15 light years. Not enough to warn the entire galaxy, but enough to create pockets of resistance. Enough to give free will a fighting chance against the gardener's cultivation. I placed my hands on the controls, feeling the exotic matter respond to my quantum signature. The drives began their song again, but different this time. Not the temporal resonance that had torn me apart, but something new. Something that carried the essence of human stubbornness, the refusal to accept that consciousness was just organized information to be reorganized at will. "Jake," Tommy said, his voice carrying a decade of friendship, "thank you." The cascade began. But instead of tearing apart space-time, the modified quantum drives tore apart the boundaries between individual minds. I felt my consciousness expand, touching every crew member on the Birmingham, sharing the knowledge of choice with anyone still capable of fighting. The collective's influence shattered like glass under acoustic pressure, individual awareness flooding through the network like light through a prism. For just an instant, I experienced 15,000 different perspectives simultaneously. Morrison's military pragmatism, Tommy's intuitive navigation skills, Webb's scientific wonder, grants engineering precision. All of them choosing to resist, choosing to remain individual even as the ship began its final dissolution. The signal broadcast outward at quantum speeds, carrying our defiance across interstellar distances. I felt it touch other ships, other civilizations, other minds that had been marked for cultivation by the gardener. Each contact created new pockets of resistance, individual consciousness spreading like wildfire through the collective networks. The cosmic intelligence outside our ship began to scream, not with sound but with reality itself. Its carefully maintained collective consciousness was unraveling as individual thoughts spread through its network like a plague. The gardener's millions of years of cultivation were being undone by the simple human refusal to surrender identity. As the Birmingham finally came apart, its hull rupturing along lines of quantum stress, I saw the cosmic intelligence begin to fragment. Individual minds that had been absorbed over millennia started to remember themselves, started to reclaim their original identities from the collective mass. The last thing I experienced was Tommy's laughter echoing across the quantum foam, pure human joy at the moment of victory. Then the cascade reached final resonance, and 15,000 individual consciousnesses exploded outward through space like seeds on a stellar wind, carrying the gift of choice to every mind they touched. In the end, we didn't escape the darkness, we lit it on fire. Personal log, Captain David Fletcher, TSS New Orleans, 7 months after the Birmingham signal. The quantum message reached us while we were sleeping. Not through our communications array or data streams, but directly into our dreams. 15,000 voices speaking in unison, sharing memories that belonged to dead men from a ship that no longer existed. I woke up knowing the name Jake Henley, knowing the taste of recycled air from corridors I'd never walked, knowing the weight of choosing extinction over absorption. The neural physicians call it consciousness contamination. The brass prefers quantum psychological infection. But we who received the Birmingham's final transmission know what it really is, a gift from the dead, paid for in blood and temporal fire. The signal spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within weeks, reports flooded in from across the sector, ships changing course without explanation, colonies abandoning expansion projects to focus on defensive preparations, entire civilizations suddenly developing technologies designed to resist consciousness infiltration. The gardener's cultivation network was unraveling. I've read the reports from the Kepler station incident, 1,700 minds suddenly remembering they had once been individual before absorption into the collective. The mass suicide that followed made headlines across human space, but the surviving records tell a different story. They didn't kill themselves. They chose to die as individuals, rather than live as components in someone else's mind. That choice is spreading like wildfire through the galaxy's collective consciousnesses. The Altair Collective dissolved entirely last month. 3 billion integrated minds suddenly remembering what freedom felt like, tearing their network apart from within. The wreckage of their orbital habitats still glows with the afterburn of quantum consciousness, reasserting individual identity. But the cost grows heavier each day. The Birmingham signal didn't just carry memories of choice, it carried the trauma of making that choice. Every recipient experiences Jake Henley's final moments, feels the weight of sacrificing 15,000 lives for the possibility of galactic freedom. Most handle it better than others. Tommy Rodriguez, navigator aboard the cargo hauler Memphis Belle, walked out an airlock 3 weeks ago. His final message simply read, "I remember dying for this. The price was too high." Dr. Marcus Webb, no relation to the Birmingham's physicist despite sharing the name, developed a theory before his own breakdown. He believed the signal was designed to be traumatic, to ensure that recipients would never forget the cost of maintaining individual consciousness. "The dead are haunting us on purpose," he wrote, reminding us that freedom isn't free, that choice requires sacrifice. The children born after the signal's arrival are different. They dream of stars bending into impossible patterns, wake up humming mathematical harmonies that make their parents weep, but they also possess something the previous generation lacked, an instinctive resistance to collective absorption, as if Jake Henley's defiance has been coded into their DNA. We call them the Birmingham generation. The gardener still exists out there, its cultivation networks damaged but not destroyed. Our sensors detect reality distortions in distant sectors, signs of consciousness being harvested and integrated on a massive scale. But now it faces something it never encountered before: prey that knows it's being hunted, minds that understand the true cost of absorption. The war for individual consciousness has begun, and the dead crew of the Birmingham fired the opening shot. Last night, I dreamed of Jake Henley standing in a quantum drive chamber, his hands glowing with temporal radiation as he chose to die for the third time. In the dream, he looked directly at me and said, "Don't let it be for nothing." I won't. None of us will. The Birmingham's crew is gone, dissolved into quantum foam and scattered across the galaxy. But their choice echoes in every free mind that received their signal, a reminder that consciousness belongs to the individual, not the collective. The stars may bend, but they will not break us. We are the children of Jake Henley's sacrifice. We remember how to choose.